All right, we got the nod. We're live. So for those of you who are joining us via the internet, welcome to Berean Grace Fellowship. Excuse me. Wow, I took a step back in time. Wow, okay. That was the first congregation. Excuse me. Fellowship Bible Church. There we go. Wow. I'm 10 seconds in. I already made my first mistake. How about that? Wow. Yeah, that's right. Man, got it out of the way. Okay. It's not Berean Grace Fellowship. It's Fellowship Bible Church, Orlando. For those of you who don't know out there, my name is Brad Kline. Welcome to everybody here. Maybe I should welcome the people who are here first. So welcome. All right. So you're used to tuning in to see Joel Hayes tonight, but guess where Joel is? He announced it plenty of times. Joel is now a married man as of Monday morning sometime, right? Yay for Joel. That's right. So he's off with his lovely new bride, and they're taking a few days just to get away. And he mentioned before, this is kind of like a mini getaway for them, and then give a couple months rest after they get moved into their new place, and they'll go on a proper honeymoon. Those are his words that he said as well. So we say, God bless you, Joel. You and Lori, you guys are just so happy for you as well. So he asked me to step in and pinch hit tonight. And so you guys are going to be subjected to that torture. All right. So, but Larry, would you open us up in a word of prayer?
Father, we thank and praise you for this assembly, this ministry, all that you're doing in and through all of us. Pray for Brad and I, clarity of thought, and set aside the cost of the care of the word. Focus in on the word and do what you have to do in each of us. In Jesus Christ's name.
Amen. Amen. So sometimes when you get asked to do these things, it's not that I'm afraid of a crowd. People know I'm not afraid of being up in a crowd, but what I like the process because it kind of forces you to focus in on a topic and try to be cogent about it and direct. And sometimes you're just having a conversation, you can meander and wander across different topics, but this makes you get focused here. So I'm gonna do my best to kind of keep it focused here. I announced last Sunday what my topic was going to be. It was going to be the topic is the divine counsel, or in other words, the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, also called the divine counsel worldview. And it's not anything that I have ever heard of in grace circles. So I don't know if I'm treading where no grace teacher has dared to go. Maybe I'm a fool for that. I don't know. We're going to find out. But let me preface it this way. So I think I'm all right. I got turned on to a book, and I happened to bring it with me. For those who are looking on the internet, the book is called The Unseen Realm, authored by Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Heiser. And I have a little bit of connection because he taught distance learning at my alma mater, Liberty University. Used to be Liberty Baptist College, where I graduated from. And of course, he's the theologian. I'm not. Oh, Mike's showing up outside. Come on, Mike, get in here. And this book, I don't think I can overstate the impact it had on me and the way I looked at the scripture, more specifically, the topic of evil. I mean, I remember praying to God, God, I just want to get it. I don't want lots and lots of things out there. I just want to I want to understand. I want to have a deep understanding. And I couldn't wrap my mind thoroughly around the concept of evil. Yeah, there's bad things, evil things happen. That much I understood. Where did it come from? Why is it here? I didn't know. And when I read this book, it had not quite, Larry, but by the way, most of you know, for my coming into the message of grace, rightly dividing, everybody knows I blame Larry for that, right? That's his fault. He's the one that opened it up to me and got me in, so I blame him. All right, so, but just short of the impact that understanding of right division had on me is now this understanding of the unseen realm. And I read the book, I liked it instantly, but I didn't have anybody in grace circles that I could talk to about this topic. Nobody out there talking to it. And then not this last January, but a year ago, January, at the conference, of course, everybody knows Richard Jordan comes up and he's sort of those who seem he's somewhat in the great grace movement, right? So he's not a small figure in the grace movement. So guess what? I went and chatted him up. I went and chatted up Richard Jordan, and this topic gets into the subject of the nations. So we're going to touch on that here when we run a few verses. The subject of the nations, and so I went and chatted up Richard Jordan at this and said, Richard, I called your office several times and your people said it doesn't exist, but I remember you mentioning that one of these days, and I since put it together. He didn't say it on any of his tapes and he doesn't have it, but I remember watching and going through the Grace School of the Bible. And on one of the videos in Grace School of the Bible, he said, one of these days I'm going to do a teaching or a series on the subject of the nations. As it came out in Genesis when God judged the nations at the Tower of Babel. And so I thought, surely, and that was whenever he did the Grace School of the Bible, 30, 40 years ago, Larry, something like that. I said, surely that series is available by now, right? So I called his people. First of all, I asked around. Nobody seemed to have it. And I don't know what you're talking about, Brad. And I even tracked down his people where they do the ministry for the videos and all that. They didn't know what I was talking about. What do you mean? They looked and got back to me. We don't have anything on the nations. So it's with that knowledge that after reading this book, I approached him at the conference and said, Richard, where's the series that you did on the nations? And what do you mean? And I reminded him what he said all those years ago in Grace School of the Bible video. He goes, okay, I think I kind of remember something about that, but no, I never did. And then so that got me the occasion to bring up this book to him. Well, guess what? He had read it. He had read this book, The Unseen Realm. Bam. Okay, now we can have a conversation about it. And he largely affirmed everything that's in this book with a few small details that weren't correct. But the general theme of it, I don't think I'm overstating to say it's endorsed by him. All right. So, but still, I've never heard him speak on it. And I've never heard any grace believers speak on it. And after today, I may be shut down. Nobody else will speak on it. Right. So that's kind of the preface I want to set. This was a big impact on me because I just wanted to get it. I don't want to understand where that goes. So if you would turn in your Bible to Luke chapter 4. And if you forgive me for this, I have one small indulgence I need to ask of you, is that my printer is broken. Usually I'd have everything printed out, but I have to access it via my phone. So I'm going to be looking on my phone just because my printer didn't work. I should have emailed it and had Sue print it out and bring it. I didn't think about that. I'm a little too late. But anyway, so let's look at that, shall we? It's Luke chapter 4. Where'd I put that here? Luke, there's Peter. We're going to get to Peter. We're going to get to Ephesians. There's Colossians. Where's my reference for? Here we go. Luke 4, verses 5 through 8. And the devil, taking him up into an high mountain, showed unto him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said unto him, all the power will I give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will give it. Okay. Oh, and 8. And if thou therefore wilt worship me, and all shall be thine. And Jesus answered and said to him, get thee behind me, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt not worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. But the part I want to get to is back on verse 5. And all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. So here's the devil, here's Satan taking Jesus up to a high place, showing him all this and offering him the kingdoms of the world. It was a pretty impactful day, the day that I realized, well, guess what? It was his to offer. And how did that happen? Well, we're going to get into that. So that's what we're going to get into. All right. So I wanted to, where's my next? that kind of signifies the last of the rebellions. We see the rebellion in Genesis chapter 3 in the garden. Then we see the rebellion in Genesis chapter 6. We may get into that a little bit. Genesis chapter 6 with the sons of God coming down and taking wives whom they desire. And then the last rebellion is at the Tower of Babel, when something happened at the Tower of Babel, and that's really where the Deuteronomy 32 worldview comes from. Let's jump on to my next one is Colossians chapter 2, verses 8 through 15. I think I have that ready right here. (8 through 15). Colossians chapter 2, verses 8 through 15. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. For in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And you are complete in him, which is the head of all principality and power, in whom also ye are circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, in putting off the body of sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, buried with him in baptism, wherein also ye are risen with him through the faith of the operation of God, who hath raised him from the dead. And you being dead in your sins and the circumcision of your flesh hath he quickened together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. And here's the verse. After having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. So the theme I'm picking up here is these principalities. This is what I wanted to know. We're talking about these principalities. Where did this come from? We're on our way there to find out. Let's see. Ephesians 6. Most people know that one. I'm going to skip that one and kind of move along here. And then let's go to 2 Peter. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. I thought I had that already set aside here. Okay, we're going to be talking about the angels from Genesis chapter 6 here, but there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. And through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you, whose judgments now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, there we go, that's what I'm looking for. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringeth in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, well, I don't have to go through there. Verse 8. No, okay, that's good for there right now. So the Old Testament explicitly mentions these gods who God did not spare. So let's go look at that, where that came from, where that originated. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 6. All right, Genesis chapter 6. Let's start reading. I think I'll stop at verse 4 here. Up through verse 4. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men. Now, these are the same sons of God that Peter mentions, we just read. That the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they were fair, and they took them wives, all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men of old, men of renown. Now, this gets into a little bit of controversy, because there's two lines of theology that branch off of this. Some that say, well, they created a line of giants, and then there's another view that came on later on, leading up to sometime after, sometime in the early church, and kind of became widely known with St. Augustine, who said this was the godly line of Seth here, and that's a term that you'll hear. So are they giants? Are they supernatural half-breeds, these giants, or are they just, are they just the godly line of Seth, offspring of that whole line? I'm not going to get into all of that right now. That's a whole topic unto itself. Just be aware that there's two lines of that. And I chatted up Richard Jordan about that. He said, well, what about that? And he goes, no, it's the sons of God, the angelic host, the rebellious angelic people who came down and sinned with the daughters of men. All right, so we're kind of getting closer to where I really wanted to go with this. There's a whole thing, and that happened early on. If you want to jump down to verse 9, there in Genesis chapter 7, and these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And perfect in his generations. And this I did learn through Richard Jordan at the Grace School of the Bible, one of the videos. Noah was uncorrupted in his bloodline. That means when these angels came down and they knew the daughters of men and created a polluted line of offspring. And this is saying Noah was not affected by that. And we needed to keep the bloodline pure all the way down to the time of Christ. And so this helped me in my thinking to understand that, a lot of it's about protecting that bloodline, unblemished, pure bloodline, all the way down so that blood sacrifice could be worthy. Do you agree with that, Mike? What do you think?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't have a problem with the angels coming down and doing whatever they were with the women. But,
Right.
That's neither here nor there, but go ahead.
Well, I know that. So what do you do if you're in the grace movement? You certainly love your pastor. Fred would say, no, that's the godly line of Seth. Then other people I know, already mentioned Richard Jordan. He said, no, that's the rebellious heavenly host sending that bloodline, corrupting the bloodline. So I'm just wanting you to be aware that those teachings are out there. So anyway, so where did I want to go with this? Genesis, I think I'm going to skip over my Genesis 11. All right, so finally, let's get to Deuteronomy 32, where I've been wanting to go this whole time. So Larry, what happened in Genesis chapter 12? Well, Genesis 10, we got the table of nations, right? And then shortly after that, and painstakingly go through the nations, and pretty soon we're alive in 11 and 12, and we get to the Tower of Babel, the rebellion Tower of Babel. So there's our third rebellion. So we've got the rebellion in the garden, then we've got the rebellion with the angels coming down and cohabitating with women and spreading that polluted bloodline. And then the third rebellion here, they wanted to raise up a tower, the Tower of Babel. And a lot of scholars believe that was a ziggurat. And the ziggurat was a stand-in, kind of a substitute for a holy, godly mountain, because in a lot of the pantheons and the mythologies out there, the gods always dwelled up in a mountain. Where did Zeus dwell? Up in Mount Olympus, right? They lived up in the mountains. So the ziggurats were a substitute for the mountains. And some people say the pyramids. I don't know if I believe that. But anyway, so I want to get here to 32, and Deuteronomy 32, verses 7 and 9. Yeah, 7 and 9. Here we go. So Deuteronomy 32, 7 through 9. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell him. When the Most High divided the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, and he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. Here God's referencing the division that took place in the judgment at the Tower of Babel. And he divided it. We're not seeing it right here, but he divided it into 70 nations. You want to write that down. It's 70 nations. And he divided it unto the children, to the number of the children of Israel. And even though Israel was not yet around at this time, the writer can reference that now in hindsight. And this is another thing I talked with Richard about. That number 70 comes from the Hebrews who lived in Canaan, Jacob and his descendants, when Joseph moved them down into Egypt, when Joseph was reconciled to his family and to his father, and he said, come down to Egypt and I'll provide for you. 72 people left the land of Canaan, and on the way, 2 of them died. I didn't know that little fact. Richard shared that with me. 2 of them died, and so that fixed the number at 70, and that's the same number that the lands were divided into at the Tower of Babel. So we can see that the nations are allotted to the sons of God, and they're now under the delegated authority of the high-ranking supernatural angels. Here's what happened. And separated the sons of God into the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. Divided the nations their inheritance when he separated the sons of Adam. Okay. And let's go on reading. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. Here's what happened in Deuteronomy 32. God is divorcing himself from the Gentiles, and he's raising up Abram, later Abraham, to begin this new plan to having a people unto himself. Before, the Gentiles had an access to him. God was direct to the people. They spurned him, and they under Nimrod, they rebelled and said, we're going to do our own thing. God said, fine. So he divorced himself from them. He divided it into 70 people groups, confused the language, and then he sent his angels, part of his heavenly host, his divine council, which we're going to get into, divine council, to be over the nations. He said, oh, you don't want me? Fine. I'm going to send you my term for this is my term. This is not a biblical term, but his assistants, or I call it his lieutenants. He goes, all right, people group A, B, C, D, you no longer have direct access to me. I no longer hear you. You have to go to one of the people. I'm putting them in stewards for me. So he put somebody else between him and them. So all these 70 people groups now had the sons of God appointed over them, and they had basically had to deal with them first and satisfy him. And if they did right, then they would basically report it back to God. And that turns out to be a disaster we're going to read into as well, because that becomes very rebellious. So that's one of the questions I always had. We read about the principalities up there in Luke earlier and Colossians, these principalities. Well, where did that come from? We just read it right here. God judged the Gentiles, divided them into 70 different nations. And that's the teaching I wanted to get from Richard Jordan, which I'm still waiting on. So, so I'm still waiting on that. Come on. Right. set them up 70 nations, and he put a go-between between himself and these people groups. And now he raised up a special group of people just for himself, beginning with Abram. By the way, this last weekend, I went out and saw the movie out there. Has anybody heard this movie out there called His Only Son? Yeah. So I went and saw it this weekend, and I can recommend it. It was pretty good. Maybe a little slow in plotting, but pretty accurate. Well, I would say it's very accurate on Abraham and his journey to go sacrifice Isaac, and it's worth it. Although it may be gone by now, I'm not exactly sure. So, having come to this understanding now that God divorced himself from the nations, he's raising up his own people group. That put a whole different spin in my thinking on, well, I'm just going to turn with me to Exodus chapter 20. And we know that Exodus chapter 20 is what? The 10 Commandments, right? We know that. So Mike, would you read Exodus chapter 20, verse 3? Oh, I didn't know to catch you. Oh, I thought you were, I didn't know you weren't turning along with me there, Mike. You're busted. Okay, I got you.
Everybody's working on genealogies. Oh, go ahead. 20 what?
20 verse 3.
20 verse 3. Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Right. We all can quote that. That's the easy one, right? The very first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. To me, coming to this understanding that God divorced himself from the Gentiles. Now, and then he said, I'm going to raise up my own people group, and I'm going to be a God to them, Jacob, the house of Jacob. They are going to be my people. To me, that put a whole new spin on this. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. So in the past, I've always been taught, maybe it's because I was a small child and they didn't want to confuse me with deeper things, but that's just little idols in your life or things that you put before God, your job or your possessions. Those are the things that you put for the gods that you put before God. No, I realized, no, that's not it. Thou shalt have no other gods. He's saying, Israel, I'm direct to you. I was direct to them, these people, but now they rebelled against me. They did the Tower of Babel. I divided them up into 70 nations. They now have to go between me and my lieutenant. Okay. I'm not direct to them anymore. If they want anything, they have to go to those heavenly hosts that I put over them, those principalities that I put over them. And that was a big aha moment for me. That's where that came from. And we think, well, they're in heaven. They're direct to God. They don't rebel. Well, we've already seen that Satan, the most high, Satan second in heaven behind Jesus, he even rebelled. So we're going to learn that they were just as prone to rebellion. Also back in Genesis chapter 6, where we read about the sons of God coming into the women, they rebelled. And there's a lot more detail if you want to go into extra biblical books, but I don't want to stand up here and do that, Sue. I don't want to get into extra biblical books around here. I'm getting in trouble, get my hand slapped for that. Okay. Book of Enoch. Okay. All right. But I got to be careful because I'll get chastised for that. So I don't know. Does anybody have any hard feelings about that? That impacted me.
No, I never heard this teaching before. This is very interesting.
Okay. Am I getting a little too wayward? Am I getting a far field here? Okay. So yeah, it's not Sonia. No, she's giving me the thumbs up over here. Okay. How about you internet people? By the way, you internet people out there who are watching, I know about this time, it's 7:30, we're about halfway through. Joel would kind of look up from his from his papers, and he'd chat up a bunch of people on the internet right now. But I don't even have that option. The computer's not even up here for me to be even able to do that. So I'm not trying to ignore you. Yes, okay, well, that's right. I concur with that teaching. Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so all right, and I know some of our people are watching on. I know Jerry and Pam are here almost every Wednesday night, but Pam said we're not gonna be around, but we'll be watching this. So shout out to them and is he on there? Okay, yeah. So shout out to them and a lot of the other people who are watching as well. So the nations, 70, are allotted to the sons of God, and they're now under the delegated authority of these high-ranking supernatural agents of God. They rebelled against God, and members of the host of heaven are allotted to rule over them, over every nation that is not Israel, because at this point, Israel doesn't even exist yet, right? He's getting ready to call out Abram, right? And even later, the archangel Michael himself will be called the Prince of Israel, and he takes part in a battle. So again, more of that heavenly host, principality, warfare, rebellious kind of stuff. So it's in the angelic realm. So I mention that because Michael goes to rebel, or goes to Israel, but he's delayed, he's hindered. So that means these principalities are of a heavenly nature. And where's my Greek stuff? I had a bunch of cool stuff on. I was going to tie into what Joel was going. Okay. And so some of the nations, like Egypt, we know we see these different kind of dynasty, very powerful nations spring up, and some of the nations had multiple gods in very different ranks, high rank to low rank to high rank, that were over them. And we know that Egypt had at least 10 of these principalities, because I want to get into that now. 10 of them. And this ties in a little bit to what Joel's been teaching on Wednesday night as he's going through Revelation, but referring back to Egypt, on how some of the judgments in Egypt relate to what happens over in Revelation. So I thought this part was fascinating to me, and this is one of the little nuggets that I uncovered in preparing for this study. So again, Egypt has its own, pantheon, and would call it mythology, right? Or you go study Greek mythology and Zeus and Achilles and all of them out there. And I once talked to a guy who was raised in Greece. He was Greece, he lived in the U.S. now, and he says, over here we teach it as the Greek mythology. But you go to Greece and they teach it as history over there. That's their history, right? So, and I believe if you have a biblical perspective, you can say, yeah, it is history. But we know these pantheons change names depending on the empire, right? The Greeks parallel what the Romans have, and then that goes back to the Egyptians. So I want to kind of get into now a little bit where Joel was touching on some of the judgments here. And this is admittedly, this is speculation, but I think it lines up pretty well. It's possible, but not certain, that the plagues sent upon Egypt by God are direct attacks upon specific gods that were over Egypt. Again, part of these principalities are direct attacks upon specific gods in the Egyptian pantheon and their area of specialty. So this might be some interesting notes if you want to write these down, but the 10 Egyptian plagues for 10 Egyptian gods and goddesses. And the God of Israel is greater than all the Egyptian gods and goddesses. We all know Moses, great prophet of God, went to do battle and wanted to get his people freed. And he had to produce some serious wonders. But it was the 10 plagues that we all know about. They were harsh and varied to correspond specifically to these Egyptian gods and goddesses that were prevalent during Moses' time. So, and the number 10, what'd I do here? Okay. And the number 10 is kind of, the 10 commandments, the 10 plagues. It's kind of a number of completeness as well. So, where was I? Lost my place here. Okay. Okay, 10 times God through Moses allows him, hey, change your mind, Pharaoh. But Pharaoh, obviously we know, doesn't do that. And so his people, 10 times Pharaoh, because of pride, refuses to be taught by the Lord and receives judgments. And the 10 Egyptian plagues testify of Jesus, the anointed one, and his power to save. Moses and Aaron are sent as messengers of the Lord. So, and Pharaoh, in his arrogance, he says, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. This is his arrogance. Soon he's going to find out. So these 10 Egyptian plagues not only demonstrate the power of God to Moses, but they correspond again. So the first one I want to start off with, what's the very first plague corresponding to the Egyptian gods? I'll give you their names and then tell you what they were. So the first plague was directed at this Egyptian god, Hapi. It's Hapi, the Egyptian god of the Nile. That's the god who, and this Egyptian god was a water bearer. The first plague was turning the water to blood. And as Aaron, the spokesman for Moses, touched the rod of the Lord to the Nile River, it immediately turned to blood. All the fish died, and the river stank. Partially, the priests of Pharaoh partially were able to duplicate this miracle. The magicians, I should say, Pharaoh, to turn the water into blood, leaving Pharaoh unimpressed. So God escalates it every single one as he goes. So turning the river to blood, wow, Pharaoh's unimpressed. I would be impressed right away with that. I don't know about you. That would make a big impression on me immediately, okay? Not Pharaoh. Remember, Pharaoh counts himself as a god as well. We're going to get to that. It suitably made the water unsuitable for drinking, and it did that for 3 days, a perfect length of time to demonstrate that the Lord was superior to all gods of Egypt. Did that have much of an impact on Pharaoh? Of course, we know it didn't. Right. The second god is called Heket, Heket. This was the Egyptian goddess of fertility, water, renewal. And it had the head. If you go do their little hieroglyphs and go over to Egypt and look, this goddess had the head of a frog. So what was the second plague? The plague of frogs. That's right. Frogs coming from the Nile River, well, because their environment just turned to blood. Why wouldn't they want to get out of the water, right? Pharaoh refused to let the children of Israel go from the presence of Egypt. The second plague that was extended upon Egypt from the rod by Aaron was that of frogs. The frogs came from the river and were in their house, in their food, in their clothing, in every place possible. From the greatest to the least, no one in Egypt escaped the plague of frogs. The magicians were able to bring more frogs in an attempt. Again, the magicians, they kind of duplicated it as well a little bit, but only Moses was able to make the frogs go away. This was another attack on an Egyptian goddess. Number 3, the god of Geb, G-E-B, the Egyptian god of the earth. The Egyptian, dang, I did it again. Here, let me get there. Okay. By the way, for some of you know, like I said, I couldn't print this out, so I'm having now to refer to the notes I made on my phone here. So that's why I'm doing that. So forgive me. And where did I go here? Come on. 1, 2, 3. There we go. The Egyptian god Geb, this is the third plague now, was over the dust of the earth. And what was the third plague? Lice from the dust of the earth. This was the plague of lice. Pharaoh would not concede. Even after this display of power from the Lord or the magnificent plague, he would not let them go. And Aaron was able to stretch forth and smite the dust of the earth. And when he did, dust became lice through all the land. Ooh, I better move it along here. All right, move along. Move along. 4. Okay. 4 was the god of Khepri, Khepri, the Egyptian god had the head of a fly, an insect fly. And what we get as that the fourth one was the swarm of flies. All right. Move on down here. And this is where Pharaoh tries to maybe bargain a little bit, and like maybe he's beginning to crack on here. And Moses said, if you're going to let us go, I want 3 days journey. And Pharaoh said, well, I'm not going to give you a 3 days journey, because they wanted to do sacrifices. And where's the place they did their sacrifices when they finally did leave, Sue? Was Sukkoth, where we get what? Sukkoth. Okay. Isn't that one of the feasts? The Feast of Sukkoth? Okay. Well, she's the lady of the feasts. Okay. All right. I better move along fast. I'm not going to get through them all. The fifth plague, Hathor, the Egyptian goddess of love and protection. And this goddess in their statues, in their iconography, was usually depicted with the head of a cow. So this plague was the death of cattle and livestock. And when Moses said, let my people go that they may serve me, killing the cattle was the next Egyptian plague, on the condition of continued disobedience to his request. This plague was given this was the first one given with an advance warning, allowing for a period of repentance to occur. Went unheeded, we know that. And when Pharaoh was told, tomorrow the hand of the Lord will be felt upon all the cattle and livestock of only the Egyptians, not the Hebrew children. Their cattle was unaffected through all of this. Number 6 was the goddess Isis, Egyptian goddess of medicine and peace. And what was the plague that went along with this? Ashes turned into sores and boils. So here, Isis supposedly medicine, and all the people are afflicted with sores and boils. Where's the medicine? It didn't work. A direct attack on that goddess right there. Again, I'll skip right through. Number 7 was this god of Nut, or Nut, N-U-T, and this was the goddess of the sky. And this is where we get the plague of hail. Hail rained down in the form of fire from the sky, and this is God taking command of the sky, nullifying that goddess right there. I'll move along here to 8. Yeah, I'm kind of running out of time here. Number 8 was the god of Seth, or Set. And this was the god of storms and disorder. And the plague that went along with this is locusts sent from the sky. And this is to have it. I'm kind of not reading my own notes here. And this one hit them in their food supply as well. So, was this the one where they got the wheat? Because, yeah, anyway, I'm going to skip over that part. The number 9 was the god of Ra. And we've heard, that's one of the names I've heard of Isis, I heard of Ra. I've never heard of some of these other gods of Egypt. But this was the sun god. And this came with 3 days of complete darkness. And Sue, wasn't Joel teaching about, didn't he mention that last week, this all-consuming darkness that's going to come upon when those vials are opened, and people are going to be sitting around in absolute, utter, complete, thick darkness? Well, guess what? It's foreshadowed here as well. So that's one of the parallels that was mentioned. And then, obviously, the 10th god was Pharaoh himself, right? Suppose he's the ultimate power of the Egyptian pantheon, but his plague was what? The death of the firstborn. He was the king of Egypt, and he was worshipped by the Egyptians because he was considered to be the greatest Egyptian god of all, and it was believed that he was actually the son of Ra himself. Ra's R-A. I'm kind of saying it like it's R-A-W, isn't it? It's just Ra, not Ra. All right. And after the plague of darkness was felt, Pharaoh resumed his position of bargaining. He came back to bargain, and he offered Moses another deal. Since all of the Egyptian animals had been consumed by the judgments of the Lord, Pharaoh now consented to the requests made, but let the people go if they must. But like Pharaoh's in a position of bargain. He said, fine, I'm going to let you people go, but leave your animals behind. What did God say to that? No, because he needs to go out 3 days and he needs those animals, I'm talking about Moses now, to do a sacrifice for the people, sacrifice of thanksgiving. So the animals were needed, and of course that shut down, and then they leave anyways, and we know the story, how it goes from there. And so Pharaoh was enraged by that, and he said, get out of here, the line, get thee from me, take heed to myself, see my face no more, for in that day thou shalt, in that day thou seest my face, thou shalt die. So he's basically saying, Moses, get out now before I change my mind, because if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. So Pharaoh was obviously enraged. All right. So, so they finally leave and they go out. At this point, when this 10th plague comes, the Hebrew people were up in where? The land of what? The land of Goshen, right? The land of Goshen. And they've been pretty much observing this because they're kind of up there in their own land. It's not clear how much of this really touched to them, but here they've been pretty passive up to this point. Now under this 10th judgment, this 10th plague, they switch from being passive to being active, and they're commanded, Moses, to put the blood over the doorpost, right? So now they actively do something, and we know how that story. I won't get into that. So the blood's there. That's in a word picture for all of us, so that they do not also feel the judgment of the last plague sent by the Lord. And so these instructions are known as the Feast of the Passover. That's where that comes from. There's the Feast of the Unleavened Bread and the law of the firstborn then as well. And the law of sacrifice under the law of the gospel and the law of consecration. That happens. All are necessary requirements to receive ultimate salvation from a spiritual death. Okay. So, I got do I have time to get into another topic here? I thought I wasn't going to have enough material. Now I got too much. I'm not going to be able to get it all in, right? So I don't know how much more I want to get into with the. Yeah, okay. So here's one part I did want to get into, because we've already had this controversy come up. Sonia, you read it. There's no godly line of Seth. Let's turn to Psalm 82 and read that. Okay. Okay. Turn to Psalm 82. This is a key passage in this teaching, Mike. You're going to want to key in on this one, my friend. You did. Okay. All right. Psalm 82. It says, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, but ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for thou shalt inherit the nations. And I've already spoken about the nations. I don't want to get into how that inheritance is going to happen. But verse 6 said, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are the children of the Most High. And if you forgive my indulgence on this, I'm going to go to the original language on, is this the one I want, or is it Psalm? Yeah, and the Most High. Okay. Psalm. I'm sorry. I jumped ahead. I wanted to get up here to Psalm verse 1. Excuse me, back up to verse 1 in Psalm 82. God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. He judgeth among the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? He's directing to these gods. Now, can I admit that kind of floored me when God is talking about gods in here, gods plural. Yeah, little g, but they are part of this unseen realm. It's part of the heavenly realm up there, and they're referred to as gods. Can I just tell you, I did not like reading that when I first read it. That threw me off. I don't know. It just didn't set well with me. But here's the part I wanted to bring out. The first word in verse 1 is God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. He judgeth among the gods. And if you want to go to the original language, the words used for both of those are Elohim. This is why it can't be the godly line of Seth in there, because in both of those, both use the same word, Elohim. That's a plural anytime you have the word im in there. And that's always plural in Hebrew, right? Im. But it can also mean, depending on how its usage is, it can mean God, singular, Most High God, but it can also mean plural and Elohim as well. We oftentimes use it as a name for God, but it's not God's name. It's not the Most High's name. It's a reference to anything that is in the unseen realm. All of that is Elohim. If you go back under the creation, he said, let us make God in our image. That word there is Elohim. And it's commonly taught what? That they're just referencing the Trinity in that passage. So that the Trinity is talking among themselves, the Elohim, let us make God in our image. I don't agree with that teaching. I believe God is referencing it to his divine counsel, his heavenly host, the people that he takes counsel with. And he's saying, let us make God in our image. God still does all the creation. I'm not saying he's ascribing any creation to them. It's the same way a mom would say to the family, hey, let's have meatloaf for dinner tonight. She's using a plural form, but she's going to be the one who's going to make it, right? Making the dinner. So again, this took me off a little bit. That's in here, and I talked this with Richard Jordan, and he said, yeah, that's right. We don't want to get, just because it's the word Elohim does not automatically mean it's talking to the Most High God. There are lots of times, though, where the word Elohim is used in the original, and it is talking about God. But another example that I read about that just threw me for a loop. All right, I got 7 minutes. We're gonna do some prayer here pretty soon. Was when Saul, first king of Egypt, he wanted to consult Samuel, who had already died, right? So what did he do? He went and he consulted with the witch of Endor, right? We all know this story. And wow, what kind of blew my mind. In the original, it says she's looking down and she says, talking about Samuel, who's already dead and gone beyond, said, I see Elohim coming forth. What? That's the word that's used, Elohim. So the point I'm trying to make, that just blew my mind. Were you aware of that one, Sue? Yeah. Did I say Egypt? I'm sorry, Israel. Forgive me. Thank you for that. King of Israel, Saul, the first king. Yeah. He wanted to consult Samuel, but Samuel had already died. Go see the witch. Witch calls forth Samuel. But that's a whole other subject in itself. Can that really be done? Okay, fine. But she says, I see Elohim coming forth. Wow, that had an impact on me. So that to me, that just solidified that word is a generic reference. Oftentimes it does mean God, our creator, Most High, God the Father, but lots of times it doesn't. So to me, that was a nail in the coffin why it couldn't be the godly line of Seth. Right. Yeah. Works both ways. So, okay. Well, I guess I'll leave it there. I could go into more, but I'd have to open up a whole new line of topic. I don't want to start something and get it going. So, what Joel usually does what? Takes a few prayer requests now at this point. Oh, okay. All right. Well, all right. So Sonia, any other comments from the internet? No. All right. All right. So I know Joel likes to reference the shout out. So shout out to everybody that's tuned in, and we appreciate you listening in. So we're going to sign off now and have a little prayer time here in the auditorium. So are we signed off, George? Go ahead and sign it off. Thanks everybody for listening.